Broadcasting live from the Wellness Wonderland, you're listening to the Wellness Wonderland Radio. I'm Katie, and each week I chat with the most inspirational people on the planet on how to stay inspired in all areas of life. As you listen, feel free to tweet at me at Katie Dalebout or use the hashtag Wellness Wonderland. I'd love to hear your aha moments. So grab your headphones and listen on the go, or cuddle up with a notebook as we dive in deep with authentic conversations right here in Wonderland. I am back! The Wellness Wonderland Radio is back today, and welcome. I have missed you. I've been on hiatus for a bit of the summer. If you're new to the show, this is Katie, your host of the Wellness Wonderland Radio, and I am so excited to be back with you guys. I missed the heck out of you. I hope you missed the show and missed me too. And before we get into today's brand new episode, the Season 3 premiere of the Wellness Wonderland Radio podcast, I just thought I'd warm up the mics a little bit by chatting it up with you guys and giving you some announcements about me and where I've been and where I'm going and the show and what you can expect this season, and really just hang out with you guys for a few minutes. I hope that's cool. So if you're new to the show, welcome to the Wellness Wonderland. What do we do here? Well, we speak to the most forward-thinking, authentic, healthiest people on the planet. They're leaders, they're authors, they're thinkers, they're philosophers, they're coaches, they're all-around groovy people who I love. So I like to think of myself as a little bit of a curator here. So you guys are trusting me with your ears for an hour plus. I'm pretty long-winded. A lot of times they go a little bit longer than an hour, but that's why I love this show, and that's why I love this platform, because it allows me to have these really deep conversations with people the first time I meet them, right? I can ask them questions that are pretty real, right? Like, how do you spend your morning, and what's the last few things you do in the evening, and what's your biggest struggle, and what are you scared of, right? I can go there the first time I meet people because I have this little reason to ask, right? That I have you listening. So it's been such an awesome, unique opportunity for me. I can't believe that there are so many episodes, and I'm already on season 3. So like I said, I love every one of them, and I highly suggest going back and listening to the archives if you're new to the show, of course. And you can find those here on iTunes if you're listening on iTunes, or on YouTube. They're all in different playlists, or on my website, thewellnesswonderland.com. If you click on the archive tab, it'll take you right there. And it's a really great idea, actually, to go to my website to get the episodes, or at least stop by there after you listen, because that's where the show notes are, and that's where all of the links to all of the things we mention are, and it's just a really great way to get your info. So check out my website. So if you dig the show and you want to support it, leave a review on iTunes. That would be super awesome. It brings more people to the show, which is really, really great, because the more people who listen, the more people who will apply the information that we discuss. And then the more people who do that, the more people who live in their own wellness wonderland. And then the more the world becomes a wellness wonderland, right? So to do that, you need to launch the actual application of iTunes to leave the review. And I would love your feedback, your honest feedback and opinions, and how I can make the show better. So yeah, that would be really great. And a couple announcements since we last spoke on me, your host. I finished my book. Yes, I'm so excited, you guys. I'm psyched. I can't wait for you to have it. But it's a long editing process, so it won't be available to you until 2016. But I am so looking forward to that. It's being published with Hay House, and I'm psyched. The book is called Let It Out, A Journey Through Journaling, and it's journaling prompts for you to really go deep, and it's going to be so great. It's really based on my personal practices, so I can't wait to share it with you. Also, since we spoke, I created and launched my Enlightened Eating Guide. Guys, again, I'm so psyched about this guide. I love it so much, and the best news is that it's completely free. So just head on over to my site and you can get it. Just a free download. So it's there. It's in the Enlightened Eating tab, and you just enter in your email and I email it right to you. So head on over, grab the guide, join the Wellness Wonderland community, and it comes right to your inbox, which is awesome. So that's about it for general announcements. So we'll get into today's show, which is a repeat guest, none other than my really amazing mentor and emotional freedom from food guru, Isabel Foxen is in Wonderland today. And today we go really deep and high level into emotional eating and freedom from food. And we get into fat politics a little bit. And it's really, really awesome. So we recorded this interview back in May, actually, before my summer hiatus. And what you'll learn in this interview is a lot of really, like I said, high-level stuff from IFD, as I like to call her, Isabel Foxen. But if you like her work, head on over to my website in the show notes for this episode and click on the link there to her free video training series, which is called Stop Fighting Food. And like I said, if any of this resonates with you, I highly recommend signing up for that. She has a really amazing program coming up, but we don't talk about the program, like I said, in this interview because we recorded it back in May, but it's launching now. It actually is launching on the 16th that you'll get the video. So it's super cool, and this woman has been instrumental in shifting my personal relationship with food and my body, which has been a big sword in my spine for many years. So I'm an affiliate for her program because I love it. And I'm not really an affiliate for anything, but I am for this because her work has so strongly impacted me. And if you want to stop fighting food, go to my site, click on the Stop Fighting Food box on the left-hand side of my sidebar, or the link in the show notes if you're listening here, and go and grab that free video training series with Isabel because, like I said, transformational stuff, and working with her has really impacted my life, so I think it can impact yours. If you dig me, you'll probably dig her, right? So that's it for me. I'm so glad to be back. Happy fall, or whenever you're listening to this. Enjoy Isabel Foxen. Leave a review. Let me know if you have any questions. Email me whenever. I'm here. I'd love to talk, and I'll see you on the other side of this episode. Have a great week. Today we have only our second ever repeat guest, and this is one of my favorite people on the planet, favorite teachers, and such a person doing amazing work. Isabel Foxen is back. She is an emotional attachment to food guru. She's a tell it like it is, hilarious, intellectual, intelligent coach, speaker, and teacher, helping women all over the world release their crazy patterns around food, ditch the diets that don't work, and feed their bodies with ease. We were just talking before the call. I call her the Lena Dunham of the coaching world in this, and she has both become a friend and a mentor to me, and I'm just so excited to have her back. Interviewing is an amazing platform for Isabel, and as you know, I love interviewing people, and I'm also so familiar with her work that today's going to just be a great jamming session for us. So if you don't know Isabel, jump back to episode 9 of the Wellness Wonderland podcast, where we go in really deep with her story and we get into how she came to this work. But today we're going to dive into a masterclass on emotional eating. So buckle your seatbelts. Let's dive in. You ready, Isabel?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so I want to bring everyone up to speed on the connection between emotional eating and body image, and how, can't have one without the other. Let's jump in there.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting because this is a really, okay, so I'm just going to actually start with, if you don't mind, start talking about the distinction that we just talked about earlier before we started recording. And yes. Then I'm going to get it. This ties into the body image thing, I promise.
Yeah, so, I had that question above, but I moved it. So go for it.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, basically, when people talk about emotional eating, I always say there's three reasons why anyone puts anything in their mouth. Ever, and one of those is like physical hunger, physical need, satiation, energy. The other is emotional hunger, right? So like, I'm lonely, I'm anxious, I'm bored, I'm going to put something in my mouth to make me feel better temporarily. And then there's binge eating, which is essentially a reaction to deprivation of some kind, whether that be like physical deprivation, like you're actually holding yourself back, trying not to eat something, and then of course, feel like you're in a box that you need to break out of immediately and like go rush and like eat an entire box of cookies because like, oh God, the diet starts tomorrow. And, just constantly feeling in that sort of rebellious place with food, like you're either tied up or rebelling. And this is a distinction that's important, is that binge eating can also be a reaction to emotional deprivation with food, meaning even if you're letting yourself even if you're physically putting food in your mouth, if you're judging yourself for doing it and shaming yourself for putting the food in your mouth and feeling guilty about it and feeling badly about it, essentially you are depriving yourself of that emotional experience of enjoying food. And also you're kind of subliminally giving yourself the message, this is wrong, this is bad, I shouldn't be doing this. Tomorrow, I'm not going to do this anymore. Tomorrow is day one. Tomorrow, the diet starts again. I think in general, binge eating, you could say, is really a reaction to this idea of tomorrow, the diet starts again. So even whether you're eating or whether you're not eating or whether, regardless of sort of what's going on, like how conscious you are of what's going on, if you're feeling shame and guilt around food or trying actively not to eat something, that diet starts tomorrow, better get it in now mentality is kind of inevitable. So that was a very abrupt, shortened version of this really big concept that I could talk about for a really long time. But the way this plays into body image is twofold, right? So binge eating, it makes sense, is very related to body image, because why the hell does anyone feel like they need to diet, right? Why the hell does anyone ever feel like triggered to diet? Like, oh gosh, tomorrow I'm not going to do this anymore, is because of their relationship with their bodies and not feeling either A, good enough the way they are, or B, are afraid of gaining weight in the future, right? Like I think that's important.
That's
as it
a
could
big
be.
one.
Yeah, it could be either not feeling comfortable with the way you are now or just being afraid of gaining weight.
Yes.
Right? So even if you love your body, and we've talked about this before.
This is my issue, to be very authentic.
Yes, yeah, totally. I don't think you're alone in that. It's like
right.
It's like I'm okay right now, but I'm afraid of the food.
Yep.
I'm afraid of the weight gain, whatever. So so binge eating and body image are connected in a really obvious way to me, in the sense that, if binge eating is a direct result of dieting in some capacity, I think what people don't recognize is that, or what people often miss, is that people don't diet in a vacuum. Why does anyone diet to begin with, or feel judgment or shame around their food?
Yep.
It's because of their relationship with their bodies. Again, either not feeling good enough the way they are, or feeling afraid of weight gain, that fear of fat that I've definitely spoken about in previous interviews.
Yeah, and I think it's either it can start as, the weight loss, and then it can, when you do it, it's like nothing happens. You've talked about that also before, is that maybe you get to that body that you had wanted so badly, and then nothing happens, and then you transition into the fear, and your issues with food are still the same.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a really, really good point, is that you have to ask yourself, well, why do you want to lose weight to begin with? People want to lose weight because of what they think weight loss will bring them. And so many women go through the experience of losing weight, right? Like I went through all of this like intense, crazy dieting, and I exercised my face off, and I worked so hard, and I buckled down, and I like put myself through hell to get this specific body type. And then once I achieved it, in quotes, it wasn't good enough. There was still more to go. then I was in a position where I felt like, oh my gosh, I have to stay in this like place of like hell and being obsessed with food in order to maintain it. Women also go through the experience of just feeling like, oh wow, I thought when I was thin that I would be, every guy would be flocking to me and I would have a boyfriend and all my friends would respect me and I'd be the queen of the world. So there's just a lot of expectations, various different types of expectations that women have about how their life will be when they achieve a certain size. And I think that not achieving that is, like that sort of dream not actually becoming a reality is also very triggering, right?
Well, one doesn't have to do with the other, I think is the point. Like your weight doesn't have to do with getting all of those things that you wanted when you thought you would that you thought you'd get when you had that weight. Just they're not the same thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're absolutely, definitely not the same thing. And I think one of the things that I spend a lot of time really teaching women is that women don't think it's possible to get the things that they want at their current size. But when you really break it down, everything that women want from losing weight, if you break it down and like to its core, like what do people want? They want connection. They want respect. They want to feel good about themselves. They want intimacy. They want, all of those things are things that can be achieved at any size. But women just they just like have this vision of like, oh, those things are only achievable if I lose weight. Like weight loss is the fastest way to get there. In fact, I'm not sure most women don't know how to get there without weight loss, in quotes, right? Like they think weight loss is their only idea. It's like the only thing. They're like, oh, I want, more love in my life, more intimacy, more connection. I want to be promoted at work. I want all my friends to like me. Yeah. Like, oh, well, I know the fast way to get there. The fast track to get there is to lose 15 pounds.
When you say it out loud, it's so silly, but it's just... we're so weird as creatures as a society that this is what we've come to.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because we could also talk all day long about, sort of one of the questions that I often get from women, which we kind of also talked about right before we hopped on this call is, but Isabel, isn't it really true? Isn't it really a true reality that like this weight stigma problem does exist and people do judge each other based on their size? Which is of course, yes, it is true. But ultimately at the end of the day, it's kind of like, well, everyone's constantly judging each other based on everything. Do you know what I mean? Like you can't really control other people's opinions of you. You can only trust that the people who are meant to be in your life are the people who are going to accept you and love you the way you are. Yeah. Like weight is it's a very tempting thing to focus on as a means of controlling how other people feel about us. But it's not that effective because while yes, people may be judging you based on your size, they're also judging you based on like a billion other things. It's like we really have this overemphasis on weight as this like determinant of how people treat us. And secondly, I think when it comes to weight stigma and sort of this whole concept of like controlling our weight, it's sort of like, what are you willing to do to get people to like you? And what are you just not willing to do to get people like you? Like, I'm just not willing to make myself miserable in the hopes of like, getting a different guy to think I'm hot. Like, it's just not something I'm willing to do anymore. Like, at this point, I'm at a place in my life where I'm like, do you know what? Like, I can only just be myself and like be the happiest version of me, which does not include dieting. Yeah. And like, the people who are meant to be in my life are going to be in my life, and they're going to be so attracted to like my flame of just like feeling awesome and feeling happy in myself without feeling like I constantly need to make myself miserable in order to like attract some sort of like false relationship that's based on this like superficial shit anyway.
Right. Yeah. So I think that here's the big epidemic that is plaguing us, that worse than anything I've ever seen is just this diet mindset that so many people are stuck in. And and even if they have heard what we've spoken about so far and they're like, yes, I've been crazy around food, these people sound like they're onto something, but I am still stuck intuitively in that diet mindset that I grew up with, the diet starts tomorrow, so I have to get it in now. Or maybe it's like just things like sizing up what's on your plate of, oh, I need to eat more today. Or, I did that workout and I need to get this in, or what. It gets ingrained in our minds. If you've been in the health space, or people coming to this podcast who have read and who are into this stuff, how do you coach people to start to shift out of that? What are some good things to get started there?
Well, I always ask people, so there's two things coming up. And the second one I don't talk about too much. I talk a lot about body image because I really do think that that's the core issue, and it does play into the health conversation as well. But I always also say, like, I think that in the wellness space in general, like, how are we defining health as individuals? Like, I think that there's a lot of just sort of like obsession with making healthy choices almost to a fault. And I'm sure, I think anyone who works in the wellness space, or as somebody who, most of my peers are in the wellness space, right? Like, I technically work in the wellness space. And I see this all the time where just people just become I'm going to control my health as a way to control my universe, right? So again, this conversation about control is a really big one, right? So I'm going to control my weight in order to control the universe. I'm going to control my weight in order to control whether or not I get married. I'm going to control my weight in order to control how my friends feel about me. I'm going to control my weight as a way to control, like, all of these things in the universe that are really inherently uncontrollable, right? Like, in reality, like, you are not in control of when you get married. You are not in control of, like, who likes you and who doesn't. You are not we have very, very, that's why religion exists. It's
I love when you say this.
To deal with
spirituality and all of it.
Exactly. This is these are all just mental tools to deal with the inherent fear that all human beings feel around living in an uncertain world, where the truth of the matter is that you could get hit by a car tomorrow. And
that's
you just
my favorite concept you've given me. It's really affected me deeply since I first heard you talk about it.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I talk about this. This is a key thing that I talk about with my clients, is this issue of control, right? So women, the big issue, the reason that women are obsessed with food is because they're trying to control the universe through controlling their weight, right? Like, if I lose 5 pounds, or if I don't gain 5 pounds, or if I control my weight to some capacity, then I can make sure that I'm safe and I'm okay in an inherently chaotic world. But that is, of course, delusional, right? If you could be as thin as you want to get, and you still might, your husband might cheat on you, all sorts of things can happen, right? Lots of good things can happen too, right? It's not so depressing. It just is what it is. This is just the facts. The reality of the situation is that 99% of the things that happen to us as individuals are not something that we control. It's random. And in a space and in a world, especially in the Western world, where people are kind of obsessed with free will, and in America in particular, where people are obsessed with meritocracy, it's really easy to think I can choose whether I live or die. I just have to work hard enough. And of course, that's not the case. So weight loss becomes this forum for us to play out this control freakness that makes us feel like we've got a handle on things. Okay, I know I won't be lonely anymore. I'll just go on a diet, and then I'll lose weight, and then I won't be lonely anymore. And then everyone will love me and everything will be awesome. And so that's sort of how, body image plays into this. But just secondly, I'm kind of looping back now, people also do this with their health. I think that orthorexia, in quotes, so people who are obsessed with only eating clean foods, and obsessed with only eating pure foods and putting pure things into their body or whatever. It's this false sense of control. If I can control my body, then I can control the universe, right? Basically I can play God. I can not die. I'm in control of when I die. If I only eat these certain foods in these certain amounts, and I never touch this, and I only do this, then I'm going to live to be 160 and I'll never die. And everything will be fine. That's sort of the underlying implication. And, whenever we feel out of control in any area of our life, right? So I often find my clients, when they're struggling the most with their body image or struggling the most with their food. It's when they're dealing with something in their real life that has this like, fear of uncertainty attached to it. Like they have an interview for a job coming up, or they're not sure if some guy's going to call them back, or, there's just something that they can't control that's just like hanging out in the wings, and they're really feeling this fear that humans attach to uncertainty, right? Or this fear, this just they're experiencing uncertainty and feeling fear about it, which is pretty normal, pretty human, pretty like animalistic behavior. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to feel this fear, so I'm going to try and control it either through like only eating like raw vegan everything so that I never die, or like weight control or whatever. So I think that, just to, again, bringing it back, body image, I think, is a huge key thing. I think that people can also get really controlling about health-related stuff for that same reason, where it's like, I'm going to become obsessed about like eating clean so that I can control whether I live or die, right? So like I can like play God, when the fact of the matter is like you could like never eat out at a restaurant and never hang out with your friends and like have this like shitty life of like sitting in your apartment, like being obsessed with like, whether or not your like brown rice
hashtag clean eats.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. Like you can do that. And the truth of the matter is that like you still might get hit by a car tomorrow.
Miserable. Hashtag clean eats.
Yeah. Like not only are you like potentially like ruining the short life that you have, like you are going to die. So you should like use your life. You should like have a good time, to some extent.
Right.
You should be enjoying yourself. So definitely like, let's try not to be miserable here. But second of all, I think it's deeper than that. I think it's also like, the just like really like just like getting an acceptance of the reality of the situation. Whereas like, at the end of the day, like even like, raw vegans get cancer too.
Right. Yeah. Hashtag that.
Yeah. Like
I think
it's,
So I think that's a really good shift for people. But on a practical level, when those types of thoughts are so ingrained in people's mind of they have that information because they've learned it and it's part of their mental construct now. How, and maybe they're using food as, they are using it as their way to control, but what are some things that have maybe worked on your clients that, a common one I know is kind of using food as a reward, whether it's after a workout or you've had a long day. And a lot of people struggle, and I know you've spoken about this before, where they've, been great all day, and then it's like they come home and then it's just like shit hits the fan and they go into this mode where it's like, I think, and you spoke about this a little bit before, it's like I think our patterns kind of dictate what we do around food. Like I know I've been in this situation, I've heard other people discuss this, where it's like, oh, something stressful just came up, I just got a stressful email, I'm gonna turn to the apple I have next to me and just start eating it because that's my pattern. And I've done that before, and then I'll be like, wait a second, like that's okay. That's the old thing I just do because I would turn to the food. That's ingrained in me. But how do you tell people to shift that and it's fine, if I eat the apple really quickly in that way because I don't want to deal with the email, or to say, look, there's another way to handle this. So, and I love how you've spoken about that before, where it's like food is a way of coping with stress and a way of coping with anxiety and emotion, but it's not the best and it's also not the worst.
Right.
So
it's not the only.
It's not
I would
the only.
Even say, I wouldn't even say best or worst. I would just say it's not the only.
Exactly.
Like one of the things that I talk about a lot is this idea of like every human being relies on some level on coping mechanisms, right? Like coping mechanisms get a really bad rap in in sort of the self-help world today. And like people are always like, oh my, feel your feelings, like whatever. But it's like sometimes you're going to need to cope. Like animals need to cope. Like they need distraction. They need pain relief. Like again, another reason why religion exists, right? Like if you're really like getting into it. So if, food is just one way of coping. It's one out of like a billion different options you have for coping. Now, this is where, going back to your very original first question,
there's a lot in there.
Yeah, well, yeah, damn. What's interesting about emotional eating as a coping mechanism is that I often distinguish between binge, right? I distinguish at the beginning of this call between binge eating and emotional eating. And it should be very clear to everyone at this point why binge eating and body image go together, right? Because binge eating is a reaction to dieting, which is just a reaction to fear of fat or not liking yourself the way you are.
Got it, yeah.
But emotional eating is also related to body image in the sense that there's actually, and this is not something I invented, I actually learned this statistic. This is just like science and evidence. If anyone is interested, there's a great book, classic text called Health at Every Size by a woman named Linda Bacon, which is like one of the most important written works about obesity-related health issues. And the connection between health and weight, and really challenging, like, what is the connection between health and weight? Like, what validity does that have? What makes somebody healthy? What's not? It's an incredibly fascinating book. But one of the things
Put it in the show notes.
Put it in the show notes. It's amazing. It's a totally life-altering book. But one of the things, it's very dense with material. This woman was first of all, a thin woman, no food issues of her own. She was just a researcher around obesity-related health issues. And she collected information and just data and statistics and evidence, and just did all these like amazing, like 20 years worth of like clinical trials and work, not trials, just, clinical like studies around eating behaviors and diet behaviors and what makes somebody fat and what doesn't, and And what she realized was one of the things that she found in her research is that like there is a direct correlation between a person's history of restriction and the degree to which they turn to food in moments of either emotional discomfort or when they are uninhibited, when they lose their inhibitions. So basically what she's saying is, when dieters get stressed out or drunk, they eat. When people who have never dieted, when people who do not have a history of restriction get stressed out or drunk, they don't eat. Yeah, they actually eat less, right? So non-dieters in moments of like, emotional duress, they lose their appetites, which makes sense, right? Like biologically, even though we may turn to food for emotional soothing, our actual like hunger mechanism generally turns off when we're stressed out. Yeah. So, or when we're anxious or nervous, that's a biological response to like, okay, we got to like preserve this fat and like run away from the tiger kind of thing. So most people, you're not actually, when you're really stressed out, you're definitely usually not physically hungry, or you lose your appetite to some capacity. But you tend to want to turn to food for grounding, right? Like food is very emotionally grounding. It really is. Like it makes you feel physically heavier, so, and also, pleasure sense, there's all sorts of reasons why food is like an emotional comfort. But it's just interesting that basically, even when you remove the judgment and the shame, even when you peel off that binge eating layer that's obviously related to body image, it's just interesting that even pure emotional eating, even just pure, like, I'm not judging myself, I don't care, but I'm just eating because I'm anxious, I'm just eating because I'm bored, I'm just eating because I'm lonely. Yes. People who have a history of dieting just tend to move more towards food in those instances than people who don't. Now, obviously, the farther away, as somebody gives up dieting, as you give up trying to control your food and trying to restrict, actually, before I go into that, I'll just say, so when I read the statistic, my immediate thought was, oh my God, that makes perfect sense. Why would that be the case? Why is there statistical evidence that people who diet, eat emotionally, tend to turn towards food more in moments of duress than people who don't? Why does that make perfect fucking sense? And the reason it makes perfect sense is because people who diet are thinking about food more. Right. So like when you look at like this whole like concept of diversify your coping mechanisms, right? Like I'm anxious, like I could eat, I could watch TV, I could snort heroin, I could smoke cigarettes, I could call a friend, I could take a bath, right? Like there's a whole wide variety of options of ways to deal with pain. If you're a dieter and you're thinking about food all day long, Doesn't it make sense? Yeah, exactly. Like if you even like if
it's the
you
first thing that pops into your mind.
Exactly. It's like I've been thinking about food all day long, so it makes sense that my immediate reaction would be to like eat something.
Absolutely.
So it's brilliant. It's like I read this statistic and I was like, oh my gosh, like basically she just like scientifically and clinically proved something that like I've had a theory about for years, which is amazing. But so that's where like even emotion. So binge eating is obviously correlated to body image issues because binge eating is just a reaction to dieting. But emotional eating is also correlated to dieting because is also correlated to body image because emotional eating generally is more severe in people who have restrictive tendencies, like even just pure non-judgmental emotional eating. So the good news is I mean not the good news necessarily, but the good news, I would say this is good news, is that as people give up dieting, as people get farther and farther away from restricting and like really relinquish control of their food, they naturally develop other coping mechanisms. Yeah, exactly. They start to learn and start to use new coping mechanisms.
Because they're thinking of food less.
Yes, because and when you're thinking about food less, what are you thinking more about? Other shit.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like you start to like get a life, you start to do things. All of a sudden, like, you know, that television show that you really like becomes your new coping mechanism. You know, all of a sudden
that's grounding to you, and that gives you the same high that the food did before.
Exactly.
And you gravitate towards it rather than the food. I'm so glad you brought that up because the whole time you were speaking, I was like, yes, right on. But I know people and I know myself, and I want to say, Isabel, like that's great, but I'm one of those people who has been the chronic dieter. Is there hope? How can I turn to another coping mechanism to be my default? And I think you just touched on that, so that's great.
Yeah, totally. The answer is basically like, I always say like binge eating is something you can stop doing in an instant. Like today, if you just decided that you did not give a fuck about your weight and you were like just going to be okay with your size no matter what, you would never binge again. Like seriously. Like I know that that's harder said than done, but like theoretically, you could do that. Like theoretically, in theory, you could get to the place where you're just like, I've had enough. Fuck it. I don't care what I weigh. I'm just going to be okay with anything I put in my mouth. Fuck it. Like, and you would never binge eat again. You would truly never binge eat again, according to this definition that I've just given you, which is that binge eating is this reaction to shame and, you know, judgment around food, basically. However, emotional eating is something that tapers off over time. You can't, like, it's first of all, no one ever gets to the point where like they never eat emotionally because like even
that's
the most
part of normal.
That's part of normal eating. It's like eating a piece of birthday cake is emotional because like you're doing it for non-hunger related reasons.
Yeah,
like dessert
is essentially emotional.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're never hungry after a meal. It's an emotional thing.
Right, exactly. Your body doesn't need sugar. Like that's not like a physical need. It's emotional and like that's cool. Like that's great. That's part
normal
of
eating.
Pleasurable eating. Yeah, food is supposed to be pleasurable. There's biological reasons for that. Makes sense. So, oh my gosh, I completely just lost my train of thought. Oh, so anyway, so the point is binge eating you could theoretically stop doing right now. Theoretically, right? If you like got the body, if you really got a handle on the body image shit. Emotional eating is just something that like once you stop judging and shaming and stop dieting, essentially, once you're no longer emotionally attached to what you're putting in your mouth, the emotional eating is just something that's going to slowly taper off over time because once you give up, when you really truly give up dieting and like basically like relinquish this like control around food and weight, you just naturally, as a human being, you just naturally start to develop new coping mechanisms.
Yeah, I love that. And it's just something to be patient on. And I think, you know, the other thing I just want to touch on is that, like, there is hope. And it's like, you're not doomed because you've had a dieting mentality that you're always going to go to emotional eating. And the other thing is that, like, you will, and I do, and Isabel does sometimes, and we all do, and it's like, it's, again, part of normal eating, and the biggest shift for me is to not judge myself when I'm doing it, and to get, that's the hunger and fullness diet, which Isabel has discussed at length in other interviews that I'll link them all. But the hunger and fullness diet is essentially when you're judging yourself for your emotional eating and saying, oh, I'm not eating as a physical need for hunger, I am bad. And that goes to the shame, and then that puts you back on that cycle. So
it brings you back to the binge eating. Yeah, totally. It brings you back to the binge eating. It's like the binge eating always goes, that's the first to go. Once you get rid of the judgment and shame, you're like 90% of the way there, in my opinion. I mean, you're like, that's level one. That has to happen first. After you get rid of the judgment and the shame, then the emotional eating, honestly, I think just starts to take care of itself over time. I really believe that. I mean, you just, and like you start, and like making your life bigger, you know, then it becomes more of a life coaching issue. Yeah. It becomes more of a life coaching issue than a food coaching issue. It becomes more like, okay, like let's expand, like we can give diversifying your coping mechanisms a little push by just making you have an awesome life.
Yep.
Like we can help you if we know that the answer to quote unquote emotional eating is just to start diversifying your coping mechanisms. Then like, yeah, sure. Let's do it. Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah. Basically.
So that's funny. I was actually thinking about that when you were speaking. I was like, really, Isabel's more, you kind of, maybe you start with the food with people and then you're completely a life coach with people.
Yeah,
when you get to their coping mechanism.
Coping mechanisms, and also the control stuff.
Yeah.
You know, the control stuff. I mean, that is like deep. That's like deep spiritualism. Like I really feel like you boil down like any world religion and it comes down to the control stuff.
Yep. Yeah.
And you know, Gabby talks about that. Marianne Williams. I mean, it is at the core of like most spiritual practice, really, when you think about it. So that's general life coaching. Totally.
Yeah. 101. So, okay. So we're going deep. We're moving right along here. So one thing I really wanted to get to, and we've addressed, you know, this dieting mentality. And like you said at the very beginning of the call, we cannot get through these issues without addressing the body image conversation. And as the reason I am here talking to you again, having all of the Wellness Wonderland hear this conversation, and when going back to what we were talking about before with being in this space of wellness. I mean, my freaking platform is called the Wellness Wonderland, but the fact is it's not about the food, it's not about the fitness. Like, maybe people come to this conversation for that, but they'll leave with the greater knowledge that it's about how to be in this world. And I think you can't really fully be and express yourself unless we handle these body image issues. So I want to really dive in there with that. And the more that we can do that, the more that it becomes the norm in society and the more people we get on board with this. So that's why, you know, I'm on my soapbox and you're on your soapbox and we're, you know, jamming today for people to hear this. So going with that body image conversation, in one of your recent interviews, you gave a tool that was a paradigm shifter for me. I don't even know if you know what I'm going to say, but this great tip that you gave was to get started in this body image, to really start to shift things, is to find examples of people rocking at either your weight or higher, your size or higher, who are really loving their life, and people that you admire, and surrounding yourself with those types of things. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I just think that that's so huge. I really just feel like, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we've talked about this, you know, quote unquote fat phobia or weight stigma is a social issue. It's that we are taught by media, by people all over. We're constantly being modeled that being thin is like what needs to happen in order to like get love and respect. So I think what actually ends up like what kind of shifts people out of that are people who challenge that model, right? Like, who in your life is like just like looking awesome, like wearing awesome clothes, like feeling great in their body, like having a wild sex life, like having awesome relationships, who's super popular and cool and funny. You know, like, who are those people in your life who are just effing awesome, who you totally look up to, and also, by the way, don't necessarily fit into your current body paradigm. Like, who are those people? Can you look to them and really ask yourself, like, well, like, why are they so awesome, and why do they have everything that you think thin will get you, but they're not thin, or they're not as thin as you, or whatever, they're not as, they're not whatever, they're not what you think that you need to be in order to get all those things. So basically what you're doing is you're calling bullshit on yourself. You're challenging yourself. You're like, wait a second, I think I need to lose weight in order to get all of these things. But then there's these women over here who have all the things that I want, and they're not necessarily thin. Like, how are they doing that? Like, how? Like, what's going on? What's happening for them? Like, why, what is it about them? Like, what is it about them that makes them so, like, awesome, even though they are not thin, basically? And it just starts to, like, it basically, you're challenging yourself. You know what I mean? Like, we have this belief that we need to be thin in order to get all the things that we want. And that, like, there's this, sort of like mutually exclusive, like, well, I'll just leave it as people think that they need to be thin in order to get the things they want, until they start to actually look around and see that there are plenty of women who are their size or bigger that actually have awesome lives, and have all the things that they want. And it's just I think it's it's a mind fuck. Excuse me.
I think that's important. And I think, I'll speak for myself. I think I intuitively do that with people, where I'll see them, feeling comfortable in their body, and I'll be like, it's inspirational just to see, anyone at any size. Yeah. So seeing that, let's say, because I do it with all sorts of people, some are bigger than me, some are my size, some are smaller than me. Mm-hmm. So when you do admire someone who is in that paradigm, but their body is smaller than yours, and then you get into that mindset of you think you need to be a certain way. Right. What are some ways to shift out of that?
Yeah, so that's a super interesting question. Is also, like, I definitely know it's funny because I was on the train yesterday, and, like, if you look at women who are thinner than you could probably break them up into two categories as well. Like, women who are thinner than you, who you, like, really, really admire and respect, and who you think are awesome, and they've got the cute clothes, and they've got the perfect boyfriends, and all the friends, and all the respect, and all the love. And then there's also women who are thinner than you who you, like, are not jealous of at all. Right? Like, those women also exist. Yeah. Like, there's definitely women who are thinner than you who are like, oh, they're thinner than me, but like
so you could do this the other way almost.
Right.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. And it's just, again, like, that's a more negative perspective. Like, of course, like, I prefer to be like, why don't you find the awesomeness in, like, women who are bigger than you?
I like that much better.
Of course, as opposed to, like, why don't you find women who are thinner than you who suck?
It's almost silly. It's almost silly, but yeah.
But the point is that the reason to just keep this in mind is just basically, like, yes, it goes both ways. Basically what I want to help women do is separate, like, being awesome from being a certain weight, like, having the things that you want in your life and being a certain way. Like, these two things don't go together anywhere but in your own delusional mind.
Yeah.
And if you actually, like, looked around, you would see that to be the case. Like, if you actually just, like, took a moment and looked for it, I think that that's a really big issue with body image, is that, like, women don't really want to do body image work because they have all these hang-ups about how, like, if I loved myself the way I was, I would get fat and everyone would hate me. It's like this, like, cycle where they, like, hate themselves and it's, like, ruining their lives, but they, like, think that self-hating is, like, motivating or something. I don't know.
How far has it gotten you?
Right, yeah. How far is it? It doesn't work, guys. Like, range. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't work. But it's kind of hilarious. Anyway, the point is like, so when women don't want to do this work, they are just looking for things in the world that support their current belief system. Yeah. So, like, if your current belief system, and this is just straight up life coaching, if your current belief system is you have to be thin to be happy, you are only going to see, like, thin women that are happy, and you're only going to see fat women who are unhappy.
Yep.
If that's whatever your current belief system is, you are just going to, like, look for things that prove what you believe. So now it becomes like, can I challenge my belief system? If I was challenging my belief that you had to be thin to be happy, and I actually started to look for evidence of that, actually started to look for women who were bigger than me and very happy, and women who were thinner than me and not so happy, you might find it. Seek and ye shall find. You know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the issue here is that, you know, to get all spiritual on people, like, judgment keeps us stuck, and that's what you're doing in the first place. That's what got you here, is judgment. And bottom line, separateness. And from a spiritual perspective, we are all one. So, and, you know, and one of the things that you taught me, Isabel, that I also really adore that we didn't touch on today is that thank God that there is bio-individuality, that we are all different. Because can you imagine if we all had the exact same body? Like, that would really suck. So it's like, stop judging and just be grateful that we are all different, and that's cool. And just sort of embrace that. And, like, even me saying it right now, it's like, yeah, easier said than done. I know a lot of people are thinking that. And I think the biggest thing to kind of take away is that, like, all of what we're saying today, and again, this is high level work. I think I want to really say that, like, we didn't really go into any of the how to get here. Like, I want people to go back and listen to, I've interviewed Isabel 3 times previous to this, and we'll post all of those. So I think it's important to listen to those conversations. But this is a process, and this is something that, you know, I go in and out of it all the time. And I just had a conversation with Jordan Bach, and we were talking about this concept when it comes to authenticity. And authenticity is great, and obviously it's what I promote number one here in my platform, but it's not something to judge yourself for when you do go out of it, because we all do. And same thing with emotional eating. It's not like, oh, scrap the whole thing. I emotionally ate when I wasn't hungry. Forget it. Or I wasn't authentic today. I'm going to be fake the rest of the day. Like, that's stupid and dumb. So don't do that.
And same thing with body image. Like, you know, I think that's really what it boils down to is, like, in my opinion, you know, emotional eating and binge eating for that matter are just, like, you know, they're body image problems in disguise largely. Like, if you, like, really boil it down, like, it all kind of comes back to this conversation around body image. And the thing is with body image, and the reason I think women do get trapped is that it is, of course, really easy to fall back into the thought of, I want to be thin, I'll get more things when I'm thin. Social status is attached to thinness, because we are being taught that every single day. Do you know what I mean? Like, there is something to be said for, like, there is, like, a...
Like, it's not your fault.
Right. Like, this is... Right, exactly. Like, this is a real thing. This isn't just, like, something you made up. Like, yes, like, there is, like, social status attached to weight, and weight stigma is real, and weight discrimination is real, and, like, all of these things are happening, and, like... It makes you're not crazy.
You're not
you're not
wrong.
Right.
Forgive yourself, and let's just fix it and move on. And that Isabel's here to save the day. She's got tons of cool programs and stuff coming up for you. You can work with her one-on-one, and she's just got amazing stuff coming up that I'm going to be talking about a lot in Wonderland. That's just really freaking cool. So speaking of, she's hosting this will air much after this, but she's hosting an event for her list. You can find her at isabelfoxenduke.com. It's her name completely spelled out. Obviously, the links will be below. But before we go, as you know, I end with quick fires, and I'm not going to ask Isabel the actual quick fires. I usually ask because they're, again, in episode 9. But I had more questions I want to ask her, so I'm going to make you answer these as quick fires. How do you feel about that, Isabel?
All right. Let's do it.
Let's bust through them, because I couldn't not ask you these, and we're running late on time. So,
okay, cool.
All right. Well, actually, we would have been fine, but we were, like, chatting before this. So here we go. So now when you're having a funky body image moment, what is some of the tactics you do to shift yourself out of it quickly?
Definitely, like, okay, like, surrender, relinquish control. Like, there's nothing, like, this is a huge question. This is not a quick fire question, Katie.
Shoot.
This is not.
It wasn't meant to be.
I mean, essentially, you know, I think that, like, I have a pretty, like, I have a quasi-spiritual perspective on weight, in which, like, I really surrender. Like, I really choose to I really look at the world. I look at my weight from the lens that it's really not something that's in my control. And that it's really just is what it is on every given day, regardless of what I ate that day, regardless of what happened. Like, every behavior I've ever taken is a result of like, teachings and things that I've learned and previous experiences. It's like the butterfly effect. And really at the end of the day, my weight being exactly what it is right now is really, truly not in my control. It is just a culmination of like every experience I've ever had, my biology, my genetics, my environment. It's a culmination of my diet history, every thought I've ever had, every trigger I've ever had for emotional eating, every time I've ever been uncomfortable, every time anything bad's ever happened to me, anytime anything good's ever happened to me. Like my weight truly on a metaphysical level is not in my control. And I think that when we that's, I guarantee will confuse the shit out of a lot of you. And you'll be like, no, it is. I swear it is. But it's really, really, if you really, really like think deeply and spiritually, it's really not. So, and I think acknowledging that like takes the pressure off.
Yeah. Oh, just you saying it, that whole thing was just, I already feel relief just saying that. I'm so glad that I asked that question.
Yeah, good. Okay, cool.
I think, I could go on about this forever, but I think, one of the things, when I had Quinn on the show, health coach Quinn, she said that every morning she puts her hand on her stomach where she carries her weight, and she says, I love you, I understand why you're here, and I release you. And I think it really goes to your message, Isabel. It's like, stop fighting food, stop fighting that actual weight, and just surrender to it and just kind of dance with the emotional eating and the body image issues and the authenticity, whatever it is, that like you're going to go in and out of it, and that's okay. And it's not in your control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totes. I love Quinn. She is so great.
So great. So great.
She's my bestie. Yeah.
Love you guys. You guys are my besties.
Yeah.
Okay, so what would if you could whisper in the ear to yourself, that girl years ago who was so scared and so messed up with this diet cycle and this body hate obsession, diet obsession, what would you whisper into her ear if you could just say like one line?
That's also a really hard question, because in my head I'd be like, there's like, I it's funny because like I would say something to the effect of like, your weight is not the determinant of your ultimate happiness. But I also know that at that time in my life, I wouldn't have heard it. I would not have been able to hear that. I would not have believed it. If somebody had said that to me, I would have said, you're full of shit. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really sort of like, are you ready to hear a message that is like, when you're like, you have to getting to the place where you're even willing to hear a body love message truly, really, without feeling like it's woo woo bullshit, is a big deal, And so I don't know, I would say that, but I'm not sure if it would have made a difference if I had heard that as a 17. I'm sure I did. I'm sure somebody said that to me when I was 17. Yeah. And I'm sure I didn't listen. But so maybe I would say, I think that what I would probably say to myself, I know what I wanted to hear when I was 17, which is, it's all going to be okay and you're going to figure this out.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So last thing, what's an example that with working with your clients that has really surprised you from doing this work, that do you find that women handle these issues pretty similar across the board, or are there different types of, obviously there are, but are there different types of things through your work that have helped some people other than others? Anything that surprised you along the way with your business, working with people?
It's interesting. I would say that the themes are generally pretty similar. However, I think where there's the most differentiation between my clients is that everyone has different beliefs that they attach to weight. So again, it's this question of, you only want to lose weight because of what you think it's going to bring you. You only care about your weight because of this like belief system that you attach to weight, and this like what you make weight mean, what you make fat mean versus what you make thin mean, right? Like if you make fat mean like lazy, disgusting, unattractive, unsuccessful, and you make thin mean like everyone will love me and I'll be confident and blah, blah, et cetera, et cetera. That's really what this boils down to. The differences between my clients are that each client has slightly different hang-ups, right? Like they have slightly different things that they make weight mean. And that's where I see the most differentiation between them. Yeah.
I love that. So again, I have like 8 more questions I want to ask you. I'm gonna wrap with one last final one that I really wanted to touch on today because I know this is an issue that people will be thinking about with this. So where does exercise and fitness play into account, and maybe just touch on briefly exercise for enjoyment rather than fear, and how that can be a hang up of people?
Yeah, I mean, really, I think that it's so interesting because I think so many people are obsessed with exercising as a way of controlling their weight, right? Which anytime you're obsessed with anything as a method of controlling your weight, whether it be exercise or food, like you are giving that thing a lot of power to control how you feel about yourself. And when you give that much, when you give like your ability to feel okay or safe or not okay or unsafe to an external environmental situation, you're putting yourself at huge risk, right? Like what happens if you break your leg and can't work out? Like you can't give anything outside of yourself that much power to determine how you get to feel about yourself. So that's a really, really hard thing with working out. Now, on the flip side, working out is awesome and it makes people feel really good. There is also scientific evidence to prove that working out actually like boosts all of these different hormonal and chemical changes in your body. People, whether they care about weight or not, men, women, wherever you're from, I don't care. People tend to actually just feel more confident and feel more calm and feel more safe and feel more present when they've gotten a workout in. Like that's just like a scientific like thing. It's a chemical thing. It's a hormonal thing. Working out just feels really good. Like when I have a day where I've gotten in a workout, like that day is going to go a hell of a lot more awesome, most likely, than a day that I don't. I do not work out to control my body. I do not work out to control the way I look. I work out because it makes me feel awesome.
Yeah.
It makes me feel awesome. It makes me feel powerful. It makes me feel like, it just makes me feel more like alive.
Yeah.
And so if women can lean into that a little bit and lean out of, I need to work out to feel good about myself, that's really the distinction that I'm trying to make.
Love it. I'm so glad we touched on that. And I just want to leave people with, it's a quote from Erin Stutland, who I know we both love, Isabel.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, movement in your body creates movement in your mind. And for me, that's a big shift with my focus on exercise, is that I have a lot to do today. I need to exercise for that reason, not anything because of my body, anything because of how I'm going to feel. I want the mental clarity that it gives me. So we'll leave people with that. We'll have all the links below. Isabel, you're going to have to come back now because I have like a laundry list of questions we didn't get to. But thank you for everything, and thank you everyone so much for listening. Thanks for listening. You made it all the way to the end. I'll be back next week, but until then, let's stay inspired and keep this conversation going. So tweet at me at Katie Dalebout and our guest with your aha moments from this conversation. And like the Wellness Wonderland on Facebook, so we can all hang out there and discuss how inspired we are and how we'll apply it in our daily lives. And never miss another episode or post from me by signing up for email updates on thewellnesswonderland.com. See you back in Wonderland.